that's one thing I wanted to ask you. Could you give me maybe 5 tips on how to become a better rifle shot? Like someone like me that hunts in Indiana, where you know for years and years I could only shoot a shotgun. Um, I
Oh
don't
my
know if you
gosh.
could throw some tips to me
I
to become a better
scratched a
rifle shot.
list out 8 different times, like
Oh
trying to hone in my hot tips for being a
yeah,
good rifle shooter. And like I come from it now from the competitive background, now that I shoot a lot of precision rifle. So I've diversified like how I handle training employees here, getting them ready for hunting season, and it's kind of influenced uh, my philosophy now as I've gone from just being the regular. I shot my elk on this 2 to 10, and I've used this same reticle. Like I don't know anything different. Like I just know this is where it goes. I've never calculated my dope. I just tried it out at the range, and like I've moved so far past this now that most hunters are like dial 200 yards. Great, I can go deer hunting. They figure out where that holdover is in their scope, right? And then that's all they know. And so my tips on being a better shooter is, I think, first is shoot more than 20 rounds a year. The thing I encounter a lot with people, like I'm talking to a guy in Minnesota right now who has no idea how his rifle scope really actually works. And that's because he's just never really shot it and engaged with it to know. And
yeah.
so when you bore sight your rifle and you're paying attention, when you dial up, your reticle goes down, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
he is like mind blown, like, I don't understand, why is it going down? And it's like, well, it's trying to help you meet the bore of your reticle, the bore to your reticle. So it's trying to adjust that cant to where they meet at 100 yards. And if you're bore sighting and you shoot one down left, the reticle needs to move down to meet where your bore is at 100 yards. I can't move the bullet up. I have to move the reticle down. And that will bring my rifle in plane to where it needs to go downrange to be on at 100 yards. And so if you shoot only like once or twice a year for like 2 or 3 rounds out of a box, you really have no concept of how that works and affects your rifle scope. And the other thing that comes with shooting more than 20 rounds a year is like the trigger time, being able to breathe, come up with a routine of how you approach the gun at every shot. Like this is how you avoid that trigger panic.
Mm-hmm.
Is by being comfortable and methodical through that process. So when you get on a big deer, that buck fever that happens, like, oh, I have a process, I'm going to breathe and I'm going to lightly squeeze that trigger. And how you look at the reticle down at your deer that you're working on, that's going to be a whole other thing too. Like, so I'm breathing, where's my reticle? Is my reticle on center of mass or is my reticle moving? Like, and how do you deal with that? And so if you don't shoot more than 20 times a year or 20 bullets a year, you're really missing out on what actually makes you a good marksman and how to handle those different situations. So that's a huge one for me. To that end, I get a lot of guys that get online, they're chatting in the Maven Optics enthusiast group on Facebook or this and that. And it's like, why does my dope not do these things? Like, so I'm sitting here and I've used a generic ballistic solver online and this is what it should be. And invest in some good ballistic solver, like download the Hornady app, learn how to use these things and true your data. So using a ballistic solver to actually know what your drop is so valuable, especially if you come out west, like being able to know, like, so my drop from 100 to 1,000 yards is 31.4 inches or whatever. So that's going to equivalent somewhere around 30 MOA to get dial out to 1,000 yards. People don't understand that. And then they go to the range and think, oh, I've sighted this in at 300 yards, but I really don't know how my drop is. I haven't trued this. Then they think they're going to go out west and shoot a 600-yard animal and they miss. Invest some time in your good ballistic data and truing that up. And there's a lot of good articles on that online. Like, call me, I'll help you. I do it all the time. But people don't understand that as well. So that would be my next one. Invest in a good ballistic solver. If you start getting really crazy, Kestrels are amazing. I use that a lot for my competitive shooting. But even apps just like Streetlock are so invaluable. Here, I'll show you. So because you can download all these elements that help you. And like even this, like I can have a whole reticle that shows what my drops over or what my drops are. Just if you're not good with inches, it'll tell you what your yardage is.
Oh, okay, cool.
And like there's so many good tools that don't cost a fortune that you can use to help you be more confident in the rifle and the bullets that you're using. And that is very invaluable to me, is that confidence level.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it seems like a whitetail hunter. He'll shoot his bow 50 arrows a day all summer long, and then
Exactly.
when rifle season comes, we shoot 2 bullets through the rifle at 100 yards the night before, and we're ready to go. You know, it's like
And I mean, I guess that works well. You're shooting something at 100 yards. And the variation you're going to get in temperature and stuff is going to be so minimal that you'll never really see anything. But if that whitetail hunter's thinking about coming out west or shooting more open plains in Iowa, that's going to change how you react. I mean, there's some open places in the Midwest like Kansas and parts of Missouri, Nebraska, where you're sometimes having to take a 400 or 500 yard shot, and they've never practiced to that end. They've never, trained themselves to be in that situation. And a lot of animals get hurt because they don't actually know how their rifle performs under those situations.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I said, what you mentioned, I was going to ask you, I think you mentioned a second ago, but what's a good resource like for people that don't know what all these terms mean that you've been talking about, and how to learn how to actually use a rifle scope? Is there like a good resource you'd recommend going to?
So yeah, there's a couple I really like right now that are easily accessible. So Long Range Tactics on Facebook, a guy named Cole Kornberg and our buddies, and he has classes for people that are thinking about getting into long range hunting. Modern Day Sniper with Philip Vallejo, like there's some good materials out there. And then the other thing is actually in your area, you guys are really blessed with a lot of precision rifle competitions right now. Mm-hmm. Like find a local league and go out, even if it's 22s, and learn how to use your stuff from top to bottom. And those are some of the best people I've ever met. That's how I actually got into precision rifle, is a guy that worked with us helping me design a reticle. Invited me down to come shoot a match. And I was like, all right, well, I haven't shot competitively in quite a few years. I come from a sporting clay background, and, I'll come down. I was hooked. And those guys are the nicest folks. They want you to be successful. They want to teach you. Like the local shooting groups are much more beneficial for my growth as a hunter and a shooter than anything I've ever been to. And I've shot national matches and everything else, but my local group and the desire to see people succeed out of that group is incredible. And if you really want to like develop your marksmanship, get in with a local group like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I have to have kind of a funny story. I was on vacation this summer out west in Montana. Were we in Montana? We were driving through somewhere anyways. And we stopped in stayed at a hotel, and there must have been a competition, competitive shoot going on in that town, because everybody in there was in this shoot. And like, they're the nicest guys. We got to talk about hunting, and we got to chit chatting about all that. And the couple guys that were down at the breakfast thing, we were talking to them, and they were like giving me all these tips and information about how to become a better shot and optics. And they seem like really good people.
Yeah, these guys are experienced. They spend more than 20 bullets a year trying to hone their craft and understand trajectories and how rifles work and how their scopes work. And I mean, and that's where you can start getting into some differences between lower grade scopes and the premium stuff that these guys are using. And, down from what whitetails hunters use to here. And so, I mean, that kind of touches on something I didn't really touch on, but like when you get into that quality of scope, trackability, repeatability, like these guys are dialing to 1,000 yards and back, and that has to move 1,000 yards and back. Mm-hmm. And when you get in those cheaper scopes, like, is a quarter click MOA, a quarter inch MOA, really a quarter inch MOA? Like, those are the questions you have to start asking yourself when you get into these scopes and you're starting to dial for distance. Like, I'm assuming that what the manufacturer says is correct, but these are still man-made objects. They can still have slight variance that when you get out to 1,000 yards, what looks small at 100 yards is ginormous at 1,000 yards. Like,
yeah,
a fifth of an inch in difference makes 30 inches down range.
yeah, which is a humongous miss. Yeah,
humongous miss. So you get,
yeah,
like, I'm all for, use the budget you have to get into the sport and just really learn skills from it instead of worrying about your gear, and invest in gear as you get better and you go forward and just invest as you can. But if you start out with something super, super cheap, you are going to struggle from day one. And I mean, the same thing kind of holds true for the whitetail hunter. If you invest in something super cheap and you're expecting it to perform more than that 100-yard range, you might be very disappointed when you try to stretch out what that optic is supposed to do, or that rifle, the bow, by not doing that. I mean, same thing with bow hunters. Like, you spend a lot of money on a good sight, dialing, etc., something that's going to be sturdy to the bow, a good quiver to make sure that arrow comes out at the right spot, like to make sure it's not bouncing around. Like, you spend a lot of money on your bow, to where guys like that don't think about spending that money onto the glass, onto their rifle, because good glass can make a bad rifle better.
Yeah, I was just going to be my next question. You hear like the old timers or people say in general, you should spend as much on your optics as your rifle. You think that's something that is like a good rule of thumb, or do you think it's more important to, like, would you go out and be like, I'm going to spend $1,000 on a rifle scope and $500 on a rifle?
Yeah, I've always heard the adage: spend twice as much on your glass as you use the rifle.
Oh, you're yeah.
And maybe that's the Western hunting mentality.
I was going to say,
because it really does mean a lot when you get out here. And I mean, really put as good a glass as you can afford. If you can afford a really good rifle, like, you should be able to afford a really nice piece of glass for that rifle. Budget that out accordingly. So if you can't spend what you want for glass and rifles, scale the rifle back just a little bit. There's a lot of really good rifles being manufactured right now. We're kind of entering the golden age of rifle scopes, or rifle shooting period, because right now you have all these other companies making high precision based clone actions, and it's really stepped up a lot of these rifle manufacturers to make a better quality product, because, well, for years the market didn't demand it, and now you have these guys that are machinists making high end stuff. And so, like, I can go out and build a new rifle with a Remington 700 clone with a performance barrel, everything, and have something that shoots incredibly better than their top end rifle that's coming out of the factory right now. So we're kind of in this golden age, or coming into this golden age, where rifle manufacturers have had to step up and tighten their tolerances and make better products, because other people can make better products of the same thing they've been making for years. And so you can absolutely step into a better rifle now at an $800 price point than ever before. And if that's where your budget is, do it. Find those kind of companies that have really upped their game and step into them. Like, there are some really clean Christians in Arms, all that sort of stuff running around that are high end, without, depending on what model you have, without paying that high end price.
Yeah, for sure. It does seem like most people have it backwards, where they're like, they dumb down the optics because they've spent too much on the rifle. It's like, I'll buy I'll upgrade the rifle without, and sacrifice the optics for it. Where it's people probably need to have the complete opposite mindset.
Yeah. So really the three biggest factors that can affect your shooting is more or less, the rifle's a little bit of that, but the quality of cartridge that you're using, the glass that you're using, because if you can't correct for parallax, if you can't see mirage to call your shots, stuff like that, it's all for naught. And like, if you're shooting factory ammunition that's all over the place, like, you're going to have a kind of meh experience. And if you're shooting a piece of glass that you can't quite get honed in, and you're chasing around that parallax, you're going to have all sorts of weird outliers when you put them downrange.
Yeah, and it's super frustrating when any of those things are happening. Like, I've went through a rabbit hole, and I never really figured it out, to be honest with you. But it's like, I tried every single round or brand of ammunition through a gun, and finally found the one that it liked to shoot. But all that stuff is important.
Yeah, and that's where you can get down the expensive rabbit hole of hand loading. And I mean, the goal of hand loading is one, yes, it is a little more cost effective than buying factory ammunition off the shelf. But two, I can have tolerances that are closer and tighter than anything that's coming out of the factory right now. So like if I chronograph my load coming out and I have a standard deviation under 1, like I'm doing pretty good. If I'm starting to have that open up and have something that's my averages are wider than that, I will have some flight differences at 1,000 yards that I might be a little worried about. Like if I'm sitting at a 1,000-yard troop line and they tap my heel and say, shoot at that 1,000-yard, 18-inch square, I might miss it completely.
I would definitely miss it completely. Oh,
practice.
Yeah. I'm going to commit to it and be a better rifle shot. I think it's, there's at least in the bow hunting world, there's always this stigma about gun hunting, and I like it all. Like I grew up gun hunting, and I think it's fun. It's all fun to do bow hunting, rifle hunting, all that. So,
no, I agree. And then my last, or kind of one of my last two biggest takeaways is people practice on a bench all the time. Mm-hmm. Get off the bench, zero your rifle, and never go back to the bench ever again. Period. Like start practicing building good positions. Like if you're sitting in a tree stand, why are you not practicing sitting freehand or using some sort of support in a different fashion than sitting on a bench? If you're stalking the woods, why aren't you practicing standing, freehanding that rifle at 100 yards? If you're out in the prairie, like, so I go out antelope hunting, and depending where I am, the sage is 5 foot. Mm-hmm. Like I got to be able to shoot over that. Am I using a tripod? What am I using to elevate myself to get over those elements and practicing like that? And that is something that people do not do enough real world experience and training to be successful. And same goes for the whitetail hunter. Like, again, it's that more than 20 rounds a year thing, but it's being able to, I'm sitting in a blind on a sandbag. How often do I practice that kind of weird hunch as I'm shooting out of a ground blind on that sandbag or whatever I'm using in that ground blind to make my shot?
Yeah, for sure.
Not very often.
No, that's a great point.
And so you're definitely going to have some abnormalities in where you're placing that bullet just because you're not comfortable being in that uncomfortable position you've never trained for. So that's another big takeaway. And then the one question I get all the time here at Maven, every phone call for a warranty repair work on a rifle scope is, oh, my scope, it's my scope that's wrong. Like it's the scope's not tracking right. And a lot of people have just really not mounted their stuff well. Check your torques, check your rings, like make sure everything is level. Like people, again, the quality of the rifle that we're seeing these days are much more precision built, but you're still seeing variances that when you put on your MOA rails, like they're maybe not equal or level, or the rail's not level. And so you get this twist when you bolt it down to the gun. And people aren't betting their rails or any of that to make sure they're getting nice, flat, even surfaces to mount things on, so where you're not torquing and twisting. And same with your rings. When you mount your scope in your rings, it's, people don't want a torque wrench and they're just tightening it so much. And some scopes have more or less tolerance than others for that type of behavior. But it can make a huge difference in how that erector moves through that rifle scope. And, all of a sudden I'm zeroed and then it breaks free. Well, I put this torque on the ring when I was trying to adjust my initial zero. And eventually that erector moves free. And now my shots are 10 inches up the paper. Yeah. Well, you pinched that housing somewhere and it's made some problems for you. And so people don't understand how much, proper torquing their rifle scope, everything means in the long run for performance.
A few years ago, I bought my dad I think it was made by Weaver, but it's like a kit, a rifle mounting kit. And it was a couple $100, I think, but that me and him have used that a lot. And like, whenever we use all those tools, they have, levels and things to bore out your rings to make sure they're perfectly flat
lapping.
And all that. Lapping. Yeah. It's like, you realize like how horrible we used to do mountain rifle scopes when you start using all those tools to make everything perfect.
Yeah. And it's still kind of the same way today. Like I haven't lapped a set of rings in a long time.
Yeah.
I still have all the lapping compound and stuff for the older rings. I've done more epoxy bedding of my rings because they're machined so well. Like in theory, you hear that, oh, I'm not going to actually like do anything to these. I'm just going to slap them on the gun and slap the scope in it and be done with it. And yes, they're manufactured so precise, but because they're manufactured at volume, there's always a little slight discrepancy that can happen in that. And you see this a lot going through the precision rifle community about epoxy bedding. And so not along just doing your MOA rail, but epoxy bedding the lower part of your ring set too. And there's some cool videos. There's not a lot about that out there right now, but it is something to just help that there's no pressure. So you set that ring in there, you let that epoxy dry and pull it out, and you should have something that perfectly goes alongside that scope. And then when you do torque them, you're not going to get any slight pinching that causes just slight torquing in the rings.
I've never heard of that. I have to look into that.
Hey everybody, if you like the channel, make sure you subscribe right here. And if you like the clips, I got 2 more options for you. 2 options right here. Subscribe right here. See you guys.